I've always liked the quiet of Willow Creek in December, Montana, even when the wind screams across the empty streets and rattles the old tin roofs like it wants to tear them from their moorings. At 65, I've learned to embrace the cold, to let it settle into my bones and remind me that life has a rhythm, even when the world feels like it's been abandoned. My name is Henry Cartwright, and for 40 years, this garage, this little patch of rust and oil-stained concrete on the edge of town has been my life, my hands, my family's legacy. But today, I walk through it knowing that the doors will soon be locked for the last time, that the smell of motor oil and worn leather seats, the familiar clang of wrenches, the hum of the fluorescent lights above, will be nothing more than a memory. Outside, the wind has picked up, cutting across the snowdrifts that stretch between the abandoned houses like frozen rivers, and I can see the skeletal frames of buildings long since deserted, windows broken, doors hanging on their hinges, the remnants of lives that moved on, just as the young folks left for Bozeman, Missoula, or anywhere else that promised more than what this prairie could offer. I stepped behind the counter in my garage office, the same desk where I balanced ledgers, argued with suppliers, and scribbled notes to myself about repairs that needed doing, and I notice it, the small wooden box tucked in the corner, dust settled over the top, the keychain, and the little leather-bound notebook inside. I reach for it instinctively, fingers tracing the worn edges, and I feel that old pull of memory, the one that drags me back to that night in 1997, the night of the blizzard, the night a family appeared at my door, soaked, shivering, and terrified. I remember that family, the Mitchells. I remember how my heart froze as I watched their car slide on the ice, how I shouted for them to get inside while the wind tore through the parking lot like a pack of wolves. I remember the children clinging to their parents, their teeth chattering, their eyes wide, and I remember making a choice that I couldn't justify in any ledger, that I couldn't rationalize to myself at all, except that it felt right. Joanne was with me then, her hands steady, her voice calm, her eyes burning with the kind of certainty I always envied. We took them in, we gave them warmth, we fed them, we found them blankets. I fixed the heater, and I don't know if I ever told anyone how close we came to failure that night, how much I prayed that nothing worse would happen. And yet, even as I recall it, I feel that twinge of guilt, the tiny, persistent knot in my chest that tells me I didn't do enough, that I could have saved more, been smarter, done better. The wind rattles the office window again, pulling me out of the memory, reminding me of today, of this closing, of the finality of 40 years of labor. I glance around the garage, at the rows of toolboxes, the shelves lined with cans of oil, the grease-streaked workbenches, and I think of all the people who trusted me with their cars, their livelihoods, even their lives. And yet, here I am, alone with the ghosts of the past and the knowledge that soon, this place will be someone else's, a corporate chain maybe, a stranger who won't understand that every bolt tightened, every engine fixed, was part of a life, a family, a history that deserves respect. I open the wooden box, pull out the notebook, and the faded ink makes my eyes sting, names, dates, little notes about the Mitchells' car, about their worry, about that blizzard night. I run my fingers over the words as if I could touch the past, as if the grain of the leather could carry me back to that cold, frozen evening when a family's survival rested on choices I made without hesitation. I feel a lump in my throat, the kind that comes from years of carrying stories, secrets, responsibilities, the weight of being a father, a husband, a man who wanted to do right and failed in quiet, invisible ways. Outside, the wind howls louder now, pushing the snow into drifts that block the road, and I realize that the silence of this town mirrors the silence inside me. I am Henry Cartwright, and today I face the last day of a life I built with my hands, with my sweat, with my love, and yet I am haunted by that night, by the people I helped and the ones I could not, by the decisions that shaped not only their lives, but the life I live now, staring at a garage that has been my world, my sanctuary, and soon my memory. I sit at my desk, the notebook open, the keychain jangling softly in my hand, and I whisper to no one, I hope you remember us, that night, that choice. I hope it mattered. And the wind answers with a howl that seems almost like agreement, like the world itself is holding its breath with me. I close my eyes and let the wind outside carry me back 25 years, to December 23, 1997, when the world seemed to have stopped under a blanket of snow so thick it could swallow a person whole, and Willow Creek had become a white wasteland, silent except for the howl of the blizzard and the groan of my old heater struggling to keep the garage warm. I was 39, Joanne beside me, still full of fire and stubborn compassion, and we were closing up for the night. The last car's already gone. The streets slick with ice that glittered under the few flickering streetlights like shards of glass. When I heard it, a sputtering engine that refused to die, a sound that made my stomach twist. We ran to the window and pressed our faces against the frosted glass, trying to make sense of shapes shivering in the snow. And then we saw them. A station wagon, snow and ice clinging to its sides like armor, its exhaust smoke curling into the night. 5 figures stumbled out, a man carrying a child, a woman struggling with another, a third child frozen in place, teeth chattering, eyes wide with panic. My heart jumped. I didn't think. I just opened the door and shouted over the roar of the wind, "Get inside. Now." And they stumbled toward us, slipping on ice, dragging the weight of fear and exhaustion, their clothes soaked through, faces red from the cold. Joanne was already moving, her hands steady, her voice firm but gentle, taking control like she always did. We got them inside, shoved the snow aside, pulled blankets from the back, set up space heaters that wheezed and hissed, but would keep them from turning to ice in minutes. The parents, Samuel and Tracy Mitchell, kept apologizing, their voices breaking between sobs and shivering laughter, for showing up at a stranger's place, for needing help. I remember looking at them, at the way the children clung to their mother, at Ashley, 9, Jeremy, 7, and little Zach, 5, each wide-eyed and frozen with fear, and feeling that pulled deep in my chest, that tug that told me there was no choice, that I could not let them freeze, not when I could do something. And yet, I hesitated for a fraction of a second, thinking of the bills I had to pay, the repairs that couldn't wait, the overhead that didn't pause for storms. Part of me whispered, should I charge them? Should I protect my business? But that voice was drowned out by Joanne's firm, clear, unwavering, "They stay. No questions." And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't in years. Absolute certainty that kindness was more valuable than any profit, more enduring than any contract or ledger entry. We helped them change, fed them, brought them warmth and comfort. And I remember seeing the relief in Samuel's eyes, the tear-tracked cheeks of Tracy, the small brown eyes of Ashley watching me with something I would not understand fully until decades later. We made grilled cheese sandwiches, vegetable soup, the kind of food that felt like safety, like a shield against the storm outside. And as I watched the children eat, the fear draining from their faces, I felt an ache for all the times I had failed to act quickly, all the people I couldn't save, all the moments lost. And then I noticed it. A small leather pouch, clutched tightly by Tracy as they entered, a pouch they never mentioned, never asked about, something that, had it fallen, I might have picked up. But I left it there in the chaos, thinking it was theirs, thinking it would stay theirs forever. That pouch would sit in my mind like a question mark for 25 years, an unspoken promise, a secret threaded through time that I didn't understand until much later. That night, we learned more about each other than we realized. Their fears, their exhaustion, their gratitude, and my own sense of responsibility, of guilt, of hope, all colliding in the warmth of that garage-turned sanctuary. I remember lying awake later, watching them sleep, the children curled together under blankets, and thinking of what might have happened if we hadn't opened the door, if we had stayed safe, if we had counted the cost more carefully. My hand shook slightly as I thought of that decision, of how one moment of courage or recklessness can ripple through decades, shaping lives in ways you never anticipate. That night, Joanne and I sat at the counter with mugs of coffee, listening to the storm pound the walls, and I felt something shift inside me, a recognition that sometimes the right choice is not the safe choice, that morality and courage can be costly in the short term but priceless in the long run. The Mitchells left the next morning, the youngest holding his mother's hand, the eldest waving shyly, the father tipping his hat in a gesture that seemed to weigh the gratitude and the debt of our choices. And in the back of my mind, I knew there was something left behind, something small but significant, that would connect us again someday, though I had no idea when or how. That night became a ghost I carried with me, hidden among the wrenches and oil cans, tucked into the smell of warm engine grease and coffee, a secret embedded in the walls of the garage, and in the rhythm of my hands turning bolts, checking transmissions, greeting neighbors. It was the night I understood, more than ever, that the measure of a man is not in his balance sheets, not in his bank account, not in the hours he clocks, but in the courage to act when it matters, in the willingness to put another's life before your own safety or comfort, in the silent, invisible threads of kindness that stretch across years and change destinies without fanfare. And as I think back now, feeling the cold Montana wind seep through the cracks of memory, I can still see the Mitchells' faces, still hear the whispered thanks, still feel that tug of something unfinished, something waiting, a promise tucked into a leather pouch and into the hearts of people I helped that night, a secret that would not reveal itself fully until 25 years later, when the past would come knocking on my door in ways I could never have imagined, and the storm of that December night would return, not with snow and wind, but with justice, gratitude, and the impossible, long-awaited closure that had been waiting all along. The morning I decided to close the garage for good dawned gray and bitter, the wind whipping across Willow Creek like it had been sharpened overnight, slicing through the gaps in the windows and shaking the old sign out front until I could feel it resonate in my chest. I was tying on my worn leatherwork apron, the one I'd patched so many times the stitches had more stories than I could count, and I felt the weight of every year in these hands, in these arms, in the ache of my back and knees. 40 years of labor, 40 years of mornings spent with grease under my nails and coffee in my cup, and it was all ending today. I had lined up the last of the bills, locked the filing cabinet, and started the old heater, the one that groaned and wheezed like a living thing, filling the room with warmth and the faint smell of oil and metal. And then the bell above the garage door rang, jangling against the quiet, and I froze mid-motion, wrench in hand, heart skipping. At first I thought it was the wind, shaking the door like it had done 1,000 times before. But then I saw them, 3 people standing in the falling snow, tall, adult, faces familiar and unfamiliar all at once, dressed sharply, the kind of clothes that spoke of cities far from here, far from the cold and the quiet and the decay of Willow Creek. My stomach turned. The first thing I felt was disbelief, then a tightening of the chest, like the years had stacked on me in an instant. I dropped the wrench, wiped my hands on the apron, and stepped toward the door, trying to read their expressions through the icy gusts, trying to make sense of why they would be here. Why now? They looked at me, and I swear I felt the decades collapse, the small faces of the Mitchell children, frozen in my memory, staring up at me that night in the blizzard, the fear and the cold in their eyes, and now, grown into the people standing before me, carrying the weight of time and purpose in their stance. My hands shook as I opened the door, the wind gusting in, pushing them back slightly, and I managed, in a voice that sounded small even to me, "Can I help you?" The woman, auburn hair pulled back, green eyes sharp and bright, stepped forward, and for a heartbeat, I didn't breathe. "Henry Cartwright?" she asked, voice steady but tinged with emotion. "You remember December 1997, the blizzard?" My heart stopped. The words cut through the years, dragging every memory of that night into the present. I looked at the man beside her, and the one behind, and the tiny, almost imperceptible smile that crossed their lips told me more than any introduction could. I opened my mouth, and all that came out was, I think I do." The woman nodded, tears gathering at the edges of her eyes. "We came to find you. You helped us, saved our family when we were stranded. And now, we have something for you." She reached into a leather satchel at her side and pulled out a small, worn envelope, the kind you only see when something important is inside. My pulse raced. I recognized it immediately, the pouch, the notes, the item I had tucked away after that night, the one they never mentioned, never asked about, but had haunted me, a silent promise, a secret threaded through decades. They placed it on the counter carefully, almost reverently, and then the man produced a thick folder of papers, crisp and new, stamped with legal seals. My hands went cold. I reached for the envelope instinctively, running my fingers over the familiar leather, the faint smell of age and memory, and my stomach knotted as realization dawned. They weren't just here to thank me, they were here to restore, to make right, to close the loop that had been dangling in the wind for 25 years. My thoughts raced, disbelief and joy mingling in a confusion of emotion I hadn't felt in years. I don't understand," I managed, my voice rough. Why are you here?" The woman smiled through tears, and it was a smile that carried the weight of time, of lives shaped and reshaped by a single choice, by a single act of courage and kindness. "We're here to repay what you gave us," she said. "Everything. And to return something that has always been yours." The man opened the folder slowly, revealing documents that made my head spin, deeds, legal papers, an operational fund set up for the garage, fully covering my debts, my expenses, the repairs, the possibility of reopening the place I had thought lost forever. I sank onto a stool behind the counter, my hands trembling, eyes stinging with tears I hadn't expected. These were the Mitchell children, now grown, now adults, now the instruments of a reckoning I hadn't dared dream of. They had tracked me, traced the years, unearthed every piece of information, every trace of my life. to find me in this moment. And they were here not just to thank me, but to restore, to honor, to repay, to make right what I had done all those years ago, quietly, without expectation, without recognition. I stared at the envelope, at the folder, at the three figures who had once been small, shivering children in my garage, and felt a wave of emotion so powerful it stole my breath. Relief, astonishment, joy, disbelief, pride, grief for the years lost, and the uncanny sense that the past had finally caught up with the present in the only way that could feel fair. I wanted to speak, to move, to hug, to cry, but all I could do was sit, staring, letting the weight of it settle, letting the realization sink in that the choices I had made, the courage I had mustered, the generosity I had given without thinking, had not been forgotten. They were here to prove it, to show me that acts of goodness do not vanish, that kindness is never lost, that the echoes of compassion can stretch across decades and return in ways you cannot anticipate, cannot control, cannot resist. And as I lifted the envelope, my hands still shaking, I felt that knot in my chest, the twinge of guilt, the years of worry, the fear that I hadn't done enough, begin to loosen, unraveling in the knowledge that somehow, in a way that I would never forget, the past and present had collided to create a moment so profound, so astonishing, so charged with gratitude and justice, that I could do nothing but sit there, stunned, speechless, tears streaming down my face, the wind outside still howling, the snow still falling, and for the first time in decades, I felt the quiet, overwhelming truth that the world had, in its own mysterious, circuitous way, returned what had been sown all those years ago, and that I was finally, fully, unambiguously seen, recognized, and rewarded, not for profit, not for fame, but for simply being who I had always been, quietly, steadfastly, unflinchingly, in the freezing heart of a Montana winter, 25 years past, and right now, at this very counter, the culmination of a lifetime of choices, and the miracle of an act remembered. I can still see it so vividly, the way the wind howled across Highway 12 that December night in 1997, carrying snow in blinding sheets that made the world outside look like nothing more than a white void. I remember standing at the counter of the garage, hands trembling, listening to the tires of the station wagon skid helplessly across the ice, hearing the muffled cries of the children over the roar of the storm, and thinking, what have I gotten myself into? Joanne was beside me, eyes sharp, hands steady, ready to take action, but I could feel the weight of the choice pressing down on me like the frozen air outside. If I open the door, am I putting my family at risk? Are we making a mistake that could cost someone's life? The door rattled as the car slid to a halt, and I caught the headlights illuminating snow-packed faces, terrified and frozen. I ran out, flinging open the door, shouting over the wind, "Get inside now," and watched as the Mitchell family stumbled through, parents struggling to carry two of the children, the eldest dragging his feet against the ice, eyes wide with panic. My pulse raced. I felt that visceral fear, that acute awareness that this was not just a choice about kindness, it was a decision that could alter lives, including my own. I ushered them inside, slamming the door against the wind, and the warmth of the garage hit like a wave, a fragile sanctuary against the storm. I set up blankets, cranked the space heaters, and watched Joanne guide the children toward safety, her voice calm, soothing, commanding in a way that I could never replicate but always admired. I had to decide what to do about the car, about the family, about the night itself. Should I call it in? Charge them for the repairs? Tell them we can't take the risk? But as I looked at their frozen, shivering faces, the decision became clear. Not clarity of logic, but clarity of heart. We can't leave them out there. I handed Samuel Mitchell my gloves, grabbed extra jackets, and for a brief moment, I noticed something. A small leather pouch peeking from the father's coat pocket, partially covered by snow and ice. My curiosity tingled, but I said nothing, focusing instead on warming them, on feeding them, on removing wet shoes and socks while the wind rattled the building like it wanted to tear it apart. As I watched the mother, Tracy, cradle little Zach against her shoulder, I felt a tug of guilt and fear. What if this decision led to injury? What if the storm worsened? What if my actions, however well-intentioned, endangered my own family? My mind whirred with hypotheticals even as I guided them to the back corner of the garage, a makeshift sanctuary with blankets piled high and heaters set on full blast. That's when I noticed the paper spilling from a pocket in Samuel's coat. Unfolded bills, notices, letters addressed to someone else entirely, something I shouldn't have seen but couldn't look away from. Death. Threats. Someone was chasing this family, someone dangerous, and by taking them in, By giving them warmth, by allowing them to pause here, I had altered the course of their lives in ways I couldn't yet calculate. I felt a knot of fear tighten in my stomach, a new kind of responsibility settling over me. I didn't just save them from the cold. I intervened in a web I barely understand. I shook the thought away, focusing on the immediate needs: warmth, food, comfort. Joanne brought out the soup she had started on the stove, and I made grilled cheese sandwiches, my hands moving with muscle memory honed over decades. But all the while, I couldn't shake the image of those papers, the sense that this family was not just unlucky, not just stranded, but entangled in a story I had never known. And that leather pouch, the thing they had clutched so tightly, the thing I tucked away and had forgotten until now, it represented a secret, a fragment of a past waiting patiently for its moment, a tether connecting the generosity of this night to consequences and gratitude I could not yet foresee. The children huddled under blankets, faces red from fear, eyes wide with wonder at warmth, at food, at safety, and I felt something in me break and rebuild all at once. Fear giving way to determination, guilt giving way to resolve, knowledge that I was part of a chain of events far larger than this one storm, one garage, one family. I watched Joanne gently help Tracy change into dry clothes, her voice soft, her hands steady, guiding, nurturing, and I felt a rush of admiration and affection that grounded me amidst the chaos. We're doing the right thing, I told myself, even as uncertainty gnawed at the edges of my mind. Nights stretched on, hours marked only by the wind's roar and the children's exhaustion, and I began to piece together a subtle understanding of the Mitchells' plight, of the debts they carried, the danger that loomed, and the profound impact a single night of shelter could have. Every choice I made rippled outward: where they slept, how they were fed, how they were warmed. These were not trivial decisions. They could shape futures. I realized that the pouch, the bills, the papers, they were tokens of an unseen story, one that I had become a part of simply by choosing kindness over caution, empathy over self-preservation. And as I finally sat with Joanne, mugs of coffee in hand, listening to the wind batter the garage walls, feeling the children's slow breathing settle into sleep, I felt the enormity of what had just happened. Not just a rescue from the storm, not just a temporary reprieve, but the invisible threads of consequence and gratitude that would weave through decades, binding me to a family I barely knew, connecting my actions to futures I could never imagine. The night closed in, dark and cold, but in the back of the garage, under blankets and makeshift heat, I understood something essential. Courage, kindness, and compassion have a gravity all their own. They pull people together across years, across storms, across mistakes and unknown debts, and even when you can't see the full picture, you sense the shape of their impact. That night, I learned that saving lives isn't only about avoiding death. It's about creating hope, leaving legacies in the shadows, and sometimes, unintentionally, altering destinies in ways you won't understand until decades later, when the past comes back to meet you, bringing justice, gratitude, and closure in forms you could never anticipate. I never imagined that day would come, the day when the bell above the garage door would ring, not with the usual creak of a neighbor stopping in, not with the soft shuffle of townsfolk checking in for routine repairs, but with a purpose that made my chest tighten, my hands tremble, and my mind spin with memories I had long locked away. It was the Mitchells, now grown, standing in the falling snow like echoes of a past that refused to stay buried. Ashley, Jeremy, and Zachary, faces familiar yet transformed by time, eyes bright with resolve, smiles tempered by the weight of years. I felt my knees weaken, my voice caught somewhere in my throat. I can't believe it, I managed, stepping toward them, every instinct screaming that this moment carried more than mere thanks. Joanne would have said, "Take a deep breath, Henry. Let them speak." And I did, trying to steady myself as they crossed the threshold, shedding coats, hats, scarves, revealing the adults who had once been clinging to their parents in terror during a blizzard that had seemed to swallow the world. The garage, filled with the familiar smells of oil, dust, and metal, seemed to shrink, contracting around the weight of decades, the space between past and present collapsing until it felt like the Mitchell children of 1997 were standing before me once more, asking for my help with eyes wide and vulnerable. Ashley spoke first, voice firm, yet quivering with emotion. "Henry, we've come back to thank you, to show you what that night meant. You saved us when we had nothing, when we were alone, when the world outside was merciless. That night shaped who we became." I felt my chest tighten as she continued, recounting the moments I had long forgotten, the courage I had summoned without thinking, the warmth Joanne and I had provided, the tiny acts of care that had lingered in their memories and fueled their decisions over the years. Jeremy told me how they had carried those lessons into adulthood, his career built around helping communities rather than profit, his choices guided by integrity and compassion. Zachary, the youngest back then, now a lawyer, spoke of the drive to advocate for the powerless, to defend those who had no voice, inspired by a night in a cold garage when a stranger had believed in their humanity. I listened, stunned, pride swelling in my chest, mingled with disbelief, with relief, with a bittersweet ache that made me realize how small gestures can ripple through decades, shaping lives in ways impossible to predict. And then Ashley paused, eyes glinting with something I hadn't seen before, a shadow of caution under her gratitude. "Henry, there's something else," she said softly, drawing the attention of her brothers. My stomach nodded. "Something about the past," she continued. "About someone who hurt you, someone who wronged you long ago. We know about it, and we've been waiting for the right moment." My mind raced. Memories I had tried to bury, the colleague who betrayed me in business, the neighbor who spread lies that cost me clients, all resurfacing like ghosts, and I felt the old anger, the old sting of injustice, igniting again in my chest. "Wait, what? What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jeremy stepped forward, sliding a folder across the counter, thick with documents, letters, and records that I had long thought forgotten or destroyed. "We found everything," he said, calm but resolute. "The debts they owed you, the lies they spread, the damage they caused. And we want you to have the chance to make things right." My hands trembled as I touched the papers, feeling the weight of both gratitude and revenge wrapped into one moment. I looked at Joanne's old photograph taped above the counter, smiled at the memory of her voice saying, "Do the right thing, Henry, no matter the cost." And I realized that this was my moment, too, the culmination of decades, a chance to see the echoes of my actions, both kind and hurtful, converge, and to take control of justice on my own terms. The Mitchells waited patiently, watching me, understanding that I was processing, that the flood of years and memories required time. Their presence, their confidence, their love and respect carried me through the disbelief, guiding me toward clarity. They told me, each in turn, how that night had inspired their choices, how they had carried lessons of generosity, courage, and moral courage into their adult lives, shaping careers, families, and relationships, all anchored by a single decision made in a moment of chaos and fear. And as they spoke, my heart swelled, tears streaking my face, not just for what I had done, but for the lives I had touched in ways I had never truly understood. And then came the revelation, the twist I had not anticipated. That leather pouch from that night, the one I had tucked away, forgotten amid tools and ledgers, contained not just trinkets, but evidence of the Mitchells' entanglement with those who had wronged me, the very people who had sought to hurt my business, my reputation, my life. The realization hit me with a shiver. My act of kindness, my willingness to shelter and feed them in the storm, had unknowingly shifted the balance, giving them the leverage, the means, to act against those who had caused me harm. The Mitchells had orchestrated this reunion, this presentation of documents, not merely to thank me, but to present a path toward justice, a chance to see those who had wronged me finally face the consequences. I sat there, overwhelmed, heart pounding, mind spinning, feeling the intertwined threads of past and present, of kindness and retribution, all converging in the cramped warmth of the garage that had been my world for 40 years. I realized, fully, that the night I had chosen to act without hesitation, to embrace courage over fear, generosity over caution, had not only saved lives, it had preserved a network of loyalty and gratitude that could now, 25 years later, restore, protect, and vindicate me in ways I had not dared imagine. And as I looked at Ashley, Jeremy, and Zachary, the grown children who had once been so small and terrified, I felt every emotion in turn: astonishment, gratitude, pride, relief, and the quiet, fierce joy of knowing that the world, in its own unpredictable way, had returned a measure of justice to me, wrapped in kindness, patience, and unwavering loyalty, and that in the room with me, amidst the familiar smells of oil and metal, the past was finally meeting the present, offering closure, recognition, and the promise of a reckoning both fair and sweetly deserved. As the Mitchells settled into the garage, unpacking the folders and envelopes that had taken them decades to gather, I felt the weight of history pressing in around me. The familiar smell of oil and grease mingled with the sharp scent of winter air creeping in through cracked windows, and I realized that this place, my garage, had been a stage for more than simple mechanical work. It had been the theater of every choice I had made, every trust misplaced, every loyalty betrayed. I thought first of Leonard, my former partner in the early days, a man whose charm had masked ambition so cold it had nearly destroyed the garage when he decided to siphon clients for his own gain, leaving me scrambling to cover debts and repair a reputation. I remembered the nights lying awake, tallying lost revenue, wondering if I had been too naive, too trusting, and the way my anger had simmered quietly, a slow burn that made me question every handshake and every deal I had made in those years. Then there was Karen, a young employee who had once worked the counter and whose jealousy had led her to spread lies about my management, creating tension with customers and eroding trust in subtle, corrosive ways. I had let her go, and though I had felt relief at the time, a small part of me always carried a sting, a reminder that even in good hands, betrayal lurks. And there were neighbors, too, some who had criticized every choice I made, some who had refused to lend help when storms threatened, casting judgment as though my failures were their entertainment. Yet, even in this chaos, I had held on to one principle. Kindness, fairness, and integrity mattered more than revenge or petty scorekeeping. But now, with the Mitchells before me, bearing evidence of what I had once been blind to, I realized that history had a way of circling back, of demanding recognition, of offering the chance to right old wrongs. Their folders contained documents, letters, and photographs, tying people from my past to the consequences of their choices, showing who had acted out of greed or malice, and who had suffered silently for my mistakes, for the storms beyond anyone's control. I traced my fingers over the pages, feeling the rush of emotions. Anger, yes, but tempered by understanding. Resentment, yes, but softened by years of reflection. Grief, yes, for the losses that could never be reclaimed. And then Ashley spoke, gently pointing out the names of those who had caused me harm, and the names of those who had endured quietly, who had borne the brunt of misfortune, injustice, and circumstance without complaint. My pulse quickened. For the first time in decades, I saw clearly who the true instigators of my suffering had been, and who had been the silent victims, wronged by forces beyond their control, much like the Mitchell children had once been on that stormy night. I looked at Joanne's photograph above the counter and felt her presence as if she were leaning beside me, whispering that now I had a chance to act with wisdom and compassion, to let justice and kindness intersect in a way that neither the past nor the present could undo. I realized, as the Mitchells explained how they had traced the actions and misdeeds that had haunted me for years, that these old tensions were not simply remnants of bygone grievances, they were living, breathing patterns that had rippled outward, affecting lives in ways I hadn't anticipated. And I understood, fully, that this was my moment. The chance to restore balance, to reward patience and integrity, to ensure that the scales tipped not toward revenge alone but toward resolution, fairness, and the recognition of courage and honesty. The storm of the past seemed to recede, leaving me with a clear view of the people I could trust, the people whose suffering needed acknowledgement, and the people whose greed or malice had finally, inevitably, been exposed. I felt a surge of determination, of calm power, knowing that my choices now would carry the weight of decades, that the kindness I had shown once could be amplified, and that the injustices I had endured could be addressed in ways that were measured, satisfying, and just. I could see the subtle pride in the Mitchells' faces, the trust they placed in me, and I knew that whatever action I chose, it would be supported by those who had benefited from my humanity long ago. The documents revealed more than betrayal. They revealed opportunity, a way to correct wrongs without stooping to the pettiness that had once haunted me, to take the upper hand with integrity intact. And as I sat there, surrounded by papers, photographs, and the people whose lives I had once touched in passing but never fully comprehended, I felt the full spectrum of human emotion. Anger at past injustice, compassion for those who had suffered quietly, pride in the life I had built despite the obstacles, relief that the Mitchells had come to guide me, and anticipation, electric and sharp, for the chance to see the consequences of my long-forgotten decisions unfold in real time. I could almost feel the ghosts of the past shifting, stepping aside to make room for the present, for this opportunity, for the reckoning that would not just satisfy curiosity or vengeance but honor the enduring value of integrity, courage, and quiet, steadfast kindness. I traced my fingers over the old wooden box on the counter, the leather-bound notebook, the key that had started it all, and I realized that everything converged here, in this cramped garage, this sanctuary of memories, this intersection of past betrayals and future resolutions. And in that moment, I knew that for the first time in years, I could step forward with clarity, with purpose, and with the knowledge that the storms of my life, the blizzards, the betrayals, the quiet betrayals of trust, the lost opportunities, had prepared me for this. The chance to set right what had long been out of balance, to reward integrity, to offer closure, and perhaps, finally, to let justice, tempered by compassion, prevail. The Mitchells watched me silently, patiently, allowing me to absorb the weight of history. And in their gaze, I saw affirmation, I saw gratitude, I saw the confirmation that the choices I would make in the next hours could restore harmony, resolve old conflicts, and transform the tangled webs of past grievances into a landscape of fairness, recognition, and, ultimately, peace. And as the wind rattled the windows, as the garage door groaned faintly in the draft, I felt the tight knot in my chest loosen, replaced by the steady rhythm of determination, of clarity, and the quiet, electric anticipation of action finally taken, of relationships, long strained and obscured, finally coming into full view, ready to be addressed with both heart and justice, in the shadow of decades of memory, snow, and storm. The garage had grown quiet after the initial flurry of introductions, the folders and envelopes laid out on the counter like instruments of some long-awaited symphony, and I sat there, feeling the tension in my chest ebb and swell as I tried to process what was about to happen. Ashley, Jeremy, and Zachary moved deliberately, almost ceremoniously, laying papers before me, pointing out accounts, deeds, and arrangements they had meticulously assembled over years, decades, to ensure that the moment of repayment was not just symbolic, but complete. I traced my fingers over the deeds first, property, documents, legal transfers, and felt the weight of every choice I had made pressed against me, as if the ghosts of past betrayals and kindnesses were all converging into this single instant. "Henry," Ashley began, voice steady but soft, "we've been waiting for this day for a long time. We owe so much to what you did, and it's time we make it right, in every way we can." Jeremy added, "We wanted to ensure that not only your financial burdens are lifted, but that the work you started, what you built with your own hands, the lives you touched, continues to thrive, to grow, to make a difference." My throat tightened. The last 25 years had been a tapestry of worry, doubt, and exhaustion, and now here they were, offering not just gratitude but tangible restitution. I could hardly breathe as they handed me the first stack of checks, accounts cleared, loans paid, and a fund established for the garage's operations, repairs, and future projects. The numbers were staggering, enough to relieve decades of stress, enough to give me back not only what I had lost, but the freedom to dream again. And yet, the deepest shift wasn't financial. It was the story they shared alongside the documents. They told me, in careful, deliberate words, how my actions all those years ago, the small decisions, the courage to open my doors, the warmth we gave them, had set them on paths they never anticipated. Ashley described her journey into medicine, the countless patients she had been able to help because of a scholarship she could afford only thanks to the stability her parents regained after that night, stability that came from my small intervention, unnoticed at the time. Jeremy spoke of his real estate projects, developments designed to help struggling families rather than maximize profit, a value instilled in him by the compassion he experienced that frozen night in 1997. Zachary told me about his law practice, his commitment to pro bono work for people facing challenges similar to those his family had once faced, work that could not have been possible without the foundation I had unwittingly provided. I could feel tears pricking at my eyes, not out of pride, but out of the sheer magnitude of the connections between my past decisions and the lives now unfolding before me. And then came the revelation that made my heart lurch and a shiver run down my spine. Ashley reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather pouch, the one they had carried that night, the one I had kept tucked away in my garage for 25 years, and set it gently on the counter. "This," she said, voice soft, "was never just for us. It contains the evidence of those who tried to harm you, who betrayed you, who stood in the way of what you were building. We preserved it all these years, waiting until we could help you reclaim what was taken from you in more ways than one." My hands shook as I opened the pouch, fingers brushing over the papers inside, notes, letters, and documentation that confirmed the suspicions I had held for decades about Leonard, the colleague who had siphoned clients, the employees who had lied, the neighbors who had spread rumors, all meticulously recorded. The Mitchells had ensured that I had both restitution and the ability to confront, to reclaim, and to set right the injustices of the past. A sense of elation, disbelief, and relief flooded through me. I laughed softly, a trembling, incredulous sound. You did all this?" I whispered, glancing between them, my eyes wet with tears I had thought long ago dried up. Ashley nodded, green eyes shining. "We did. And it's not just the financials or the legal victories. We've established a community center in Willow Creek in your name to continue the work you started, to help others in need, to ensure that no one faces the storms of life alone as we once did. My chest swelled with a combination of awe and uncontainable joy. Every choice I had made, every act of courage and kindness had culminated in this moment. Recognition, restitution, and a chance to see the fruits of my labor and integrity multiplied beyond anything I could have imagined. And then, as if the universe had aligned perfectly, they revealed the final piece, a carefully written letter from Tracy and Samuel Mitchell, expressing gratitude not only for the shelter and warmth, but for the unseen guidance I had unknowingly provided, for creating the conditions that allowed them to thrive and, in turn, help countless others. My hands shook as I read each line, feeling the decades of worry, exhaustion, and guilt dissolve into pure, unfiltered relief. The anger, the doubts, the fears of the past could not touch me now. They had been transformed into the most profound affirmation of human connection, justice, and the enduring impact of kindness. I looked up at the Mitchells, now adults who had once been terrified children, and my heart expanded with pride and love, a feeling so full it was almost painful. I realized, in that moment, that justice had been served not as vengeance, not as punishment, but as recognition, reward, and restoration. The people who had wronged me in the past had no power here. The kindness I had shown had set in motion a chain of events that reclaimed not only my losses, but honored my integrity, my courage, and the life Joanne and I had built together. My laughter and tears mingled as I felt a sense of closure and vindication unlike anything I had ever experienced. The garage, once a place of routine oil and worry, had become a sanctuary of reconciliation, a stage for the triumph of good over malice, for the proof that human kindness does not vanish, that it waits, quietly, to return in moments of profound and unexpected fulfillment. I could barely speak as I held the letter in the pouch, as I felt the weight of decades lift, replaced by a buoyant, almost dizzying sense of joy, relief, and justice achieved. And as I looked at Ashley, Jeremy, and Zachary, I knew that this was more than repayment. It was the affirmation that every act of courage, every risk taken in the service of others, no matter how small, resonates across time, shaping lives, creating legacies, and restoring balance in ways that words could never fully capture. In that moment, the cold Montana wind outside, the gray sky, the snow, the groan of the old garage door, all of it faded into the background, leaving only the overwhelming, magnificent, and utterly human truth. Kindness, courage, and integrity, when sustained over a lifetime, have a way of coming home, bringing with them justice, love, and a sweet, perfect vindication that is more fulfilling than anything I could have ever imagined. I never imagined that the day would come when I would see him again, the one who had haunted the edges of my professional life for decades, the one whose greed and cunning had drained clients, spread lies, and threatened everything Joanne and I had built with our hands and our sweat. The winter sun outside Willow Creek barely broke through a pale gray sky, casting the garage in long, cold shadows as I waited, heart pounding, listening to the Mitchells shift nervously behind me. I could feel the weight of years, the quiet tension that had stretched like a taut wire from the past into this very moment. And then he arrived, stepping through the door, polished and confident as ever, unaware that the years had changed the balance, that the people he had underestimated were now aligned in ways he could never predict. Leonard had been his instrument, the facilitator of misdeeds, and now the irony struck me. Those very actions he had taken to undermine me had become the evidence for my vindication, meticulously compiled by the Mitchells and presented with calm precision. I swallowed hard, my hands curling into fists at my sides, feeling the familiar mix of fear, anticipation, and a surge of controlled anger. Joanne's words echoed in my mind, though she had been gone for years. Do the right thing, Henry. With courage and integrity. I drew in a steadying breath, letting the chill of the Montana air sharpen my focus. Thomas, I said, using the name I had avoided and thought for so long, we need to talk about the past. He looked at me, eyebrows raised, an uneasy flicker crossing his face, though he quickly masked it with his usual arrogance. Henry, he replied smoothly, it's been a while. I hear things have been resolved. I'll let the pause hang, letting the weight of the room settle. The air between us thick with years of unresolved tension, the faint smell of oil and metal grounding me in my sanctuary. I motioned toward the counter, the folders, the envelopes, evidence, meticulously assembled, undeniable. Resolved? I said, my voice calm, but edged with steel. I'd like to think not until justice is balanced. Do you remember Willow Creek in '97, the winter storm? His eyes flickered, a momentary recognition, then carefully neutral. Vaguely. Many storms in this town. I stepped closer, letting the weight of my presence fill the space, drawing a line between the man who had sought advantage through deceit and the life I had maintained through integrity. Do you remember your actions that cost me clients, undermined our reputation, threatened the garage my wife and I built? The choices you made had consequences beyond what you imagined, and now those consequences are here. He laughed softly, a dismissive sound, but I could see the tension beneath it. Henry, I don't see what? No, Thomas, I interrupted, voice firm, eyes locking on his. You do see? Because the Mitchells, the family I helped all those years ago, have brought everything to light. Every action, every lie, every scheme you attempted, they've been documented, organized, and made undeniable. And I am here to ensure the outcome is appropriate. My hands moved to the folder, sliding the papers across the counter. Each document a shard of proof, a record of manipulation, a reflection of his greed. His confident mask faltered as he glanced at the pages, the lines of evidence connecting him to the obstacles, the betrayals, the silent suffering he caused me. I could feel the room tighten around him, the weight of years pressing in, and I let the Mitchells speak, letting their calm authority underscore the inevitability of accountability. We preserved everything, Ashley said softly, voice carrying more weight than any threat could. Every document, every note, every pattern of behavior. It's not vengeance, it's truth. I could see him swallow, the arrogance cracking into an ease. Jeremy leaned forward, presenting spreadsheets and letters, tying past actions to real consequences, illustrating how his schemes had ripple effects that affected countless lives. Zachary, the youngest I had ever known, now fully grown and deliberate in his movements, spoke of fairness, morality, and the opportunity to correct the imbalance. You have a choice, I said finally, voice steady but charged. You can acknowledge the past, make restitution, and face the consequences of your actions responsibly. Or you can continue the same path, knowing that the evidence, the truth, and those you underestimated are aligned against you. The silence was electric, thick with tension, the Montana wind outside rattling the windows, echoing the storm of decades long past. I felt my chest tighten, heart hammering, as I watched his confidence crumble, replaced with the flicker of recognition that for once, he was not in control. I did not raise my voice. I did not threaten. I did not act impulsively. The power was in the truth, in the careful, deliberate presentation of facts, in the moral leverage we held. And slowly, subtly, I saw him understand, the corners of his mouth tight, eyes darting, fingers brushing nervously over the papers. He realized, fully, that he could not manipulate or charm his way out, that the balance had shifted irrevocably. And in that recognition, I felt a surge of relief and satisfaction, a justice so pure it was almost tangible in the cold Montana air. My mind traced back to Joanne, imagining her here beside me, nodding in approval, and I felt a deep, abiding joy, a release of decades of stress and fear, a knowledge that I had acted rightly, with integrity, and that the universe, in its own mysterious way, had aligned circumstances so that reckoning was possible without stooping to malice. I let him absorb the weight of what was presented, the folders, the documents, the meticulous evidence of past transgressions and their consequences. And then I leaned back, feeling the culmination of 40 years of labor, courage, and moral clarity settle over me. He had no room to argue, no way to evade responsibility, and yet the approach had been humane, deliberate, and fair. No shouting, no threats, no vengeance beyond the presentation of truth. It was a confrontation tempered with integrity, ensuring consequences were delivered without cruelty, but undeniable in their effect. And as he finally nodded, shoulders slumping, eyes downcast, I felt the long-held tension within me dissolve, replaced with an almost dizzying sense of accomplishment, satisfaction, and the quiet thrill of justice, exacted not through rage, but through careful, moral action. The Mitchells watched silently, their presence reinforcing the inevitability of fairness, the ethical elegance of the moment, and I felt a surge of pride in their guidance, their wisdom, and the impact of our collective patience, courage, and planning. The storm outside continued, indifferent and relentless, but inside, the past had finally met the present, and the balance had shifted. The man who had once caused me pain now understood that actions have consequences, that kindness, diligence, and integrity have power beyond immediate perception, and that reckoning can come quietly, deliberately, and with justice intact. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain, feeling the Montana cold on my face, the warmth of the garage around me, and the satisfaction of seeing a life of wrongs confronted fairly, an equilibrium restored, and the knowledge that the next steps, the next chapters, would be guided by justice, compassion, and the enduring truth that good actions, even those decades past, have a way of returning in full measure. The silence in the garage was thick, almost tangible, after the confrontation with Thomas. I could still feel the echo of the storm outside and the faint rattling of the windows, the chill seeping through the cracks in the walls, but inside, everything was still, suspended in the gravity of what had just occurred. Thomas sat across from me, the papers in front of him like a mirror reflecting every misdeed he had tried to hide for decades, and I could see it now, the weight of recognition, the uncomfortable shift in power, and the realization that the world, for once, had tilted in a way he could not manipulate. I breathed slowly, feeling the tension drain, replaced with a cautious calm, a deep sense of fulfillment that this confrontation had been executed with precision, fairness, and the integrity I had clung to all these years. No shouting, no threats, no humiliation, just truth, undeniable and meticulous, leaving Thomas to grapple with the consequences of his actions, consequences he had sown long ago, yet now arriving quietly, inexorably, in a form both humane and exact. As the Mitchells observed, their presence a silent affirmation of the moral power at play, I felt the fullness of emotion rush through me. Pride, relief, joy, and the quiet ecstasy of justice delivered not in malice, but with integrity. And then my eyes fell upon the small leather-bound notebook, the same one I had taken from that night in 1997 and kept tucked away in the corner of the garage for all these years. The notebook that had held scribbles, sketches, and the tiny fragments of a night that had shaped not only the Mitchells' lives but mine as well. I picked it up, dusting off the faint layer of time, and something slipped from between its pages, a folded, yellowed note, faded but unmistakable. It was a message I had never read, left behind by Samuel Mitchell all those years ago, a note of gratitude and quiet promise, acknowledging the impact of our actions, and hinting at the chain of influence that had rippled outward from that night of terror and snow. I unfolded it carefully, and as I read the words, I realized that the final pieces of the puzzle had aligned. The past, the storm, the acts of kindness, the betrayals, the hardships, all converged here, now, in the clarity of justice and the warmth of recognition. The note spoke of hope restored, of lessons carried forward, of gratitude extending beyond memory, and as I traced the handwriting, I felt tears burn in my eyes, a mixture of wonder, relief, and the profound satisfaction that comes only when long-held tensions are resolved with dignity. The Mitchells smiled gently, aware of my discovery, letting me absorb the significance in my own way. Thomas, across the counter, shifted uncomfortably, aware that the notebook, the note, and the meticulously organized folders now rendered him powerless, yet I could see in his eyes a flicker of understanding. That justice had arrived not through vengeance, but through the careful orchestration of truth, moral clarity, and the recognition that our actions, even when unseen, resonate across decades. I felt my shoulders relax, the years of tension, fear, and quiet anger washing away as I realized that the balance had been restored, not just for me, but for everyone affected by these choices. And then Ashley spoke, softly but firmly. "Henry, the story doesn't end here. The community center is operational, the garage is debt-free, and every action you took is now a foundation for ongoing good. Your courage, your patience, your integrity, they have all borne fruit in ways you couldn't have imagined." I swallowed, overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. The combination of restitution, the symbolic power of the note, and the tangible reality of the Mitchells' success created a wave of emotion that left me gasping, my hands trembling as I held the notebook close, feeling the connection between past and present, between effort and reward, between kindness and recognition. And then, as if the past had one more surprise to offer, Jeremy handed me a small envelope, heavy and thick with weight, and said, "We wanted you to have this. Open it when you're ready." My hands shook as I peeled it open, and inside was a single, simple token, a key, the same shape and worn feel as the one I had given to secure their car that night, a symbolic reminder that the choices we make, the doors we open, the risks we take, they echo through time. I held it in my palm, feeling decades of memory and consequence condensed into that one, tangible object, and I realized that this key, like the note and the folders, connected every thread. The storm, the acts of courage, the betrayals, the kindness, the restitution, And now, the final symbol of closure and understanding. I looked up at the Mitchells, their eyes bright, their expressions serene, and I felt the fullness of humanity in the room. The intricate web of cause and effect, of kindness repaid, of justice tempered with mercy, and the unspoken acknowledgement that we are all bound by the choices we make and the care we show to one another. Thomas remained silent, shifting uncomfortably, yet I could sense a grudging respect forming in him, a recognition that while he had once wielded power through deceit, he now stood witness to the quiet force of integrity, patience, and moral courage. I exhaled slowly, the tension releasing in a long, shuddering breath, feeling the storm of decades settle outside and within me, and for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. The garage, the tools, the heaters, the folders, the notebooks, the key, they were all pieces of a story completed, a cycle of actions and consequences that had been long in the making. I realized that the sweetest part of justice was not punishment, not humiliation, but the subtle, almost invisible ways that truth, kindness, and integrity converge to restore balance, bring recognition, and create a sense of fulfillment that lingers long after the storm has passed. The Mitchells stood around me, calm, smiling, and I felt the warmth of community, of gratitude, of human connection flooding the space. I could see how the note, the key, and the folders tied every memory together, creating a bridge between the terror of that blizzard night and the triumph of today. In that moment, I understood something essential. Revenge alone is hollow, punishment alone is fleeting, but justice crafted with compassion, patience, and integrity carries the power to heal, restore, and affirm the human spirit. And as I placed the key on the counter, feeling its worn edges against my fingertips, I knew that the past had finally come full circle, that the debts of fear and greed had been settled, and that the legacy of kindness, courage, and integrity I had cultivated all these years would live on, tangible, recognized, and honored in ways I could never have imagined. I stepped back into the garage the next morning, sunlight spilling weakly through the dusty windows, catching on the oil-streaked concrete and the rows of tools that had been my companions for 40 years. Everything looked the same, yet everything felt different. The air smelled cleaner, warmer, imbued with a faint trace of new paint, the faint tang of freshly oiled metal, and beneath it all, the subtle comfort of normalcy restored. I ran my hands along the counter, the edge smooth where decades of work had worn it down, and I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in years, a sense that this place, my sanctuary, had been reclaimed, renewed not just by the documents and funds the Mitchells had delivered, but by the quiet, steady heartbeat of a community that had always been waiting for the chance to see it thrive again. People trickled in, not in the hurried rush of transactions, but with the calm, deliberate presence of neighbors who had come to witness a moment of reclamation. Mrs. Carter, who had once refused to greet me when my shop had been small and struggling, paused by the door, eyes wide, and offered a hesitant smile, nodding in recognition of the years of integrity I had sustained. Even those who had once mocked my cautious approach, my dedication to honesty over expedience, now looked at me with a quiet respect, acknowledging the life I had built and the patience I had maintained through betrayal, hardship, and relentless storms. The Mitchells were there, of course, standing slightly to the side, not seeking attention, but simply enjoying the unfolding scene. Their presence a reminder that actions taken decades ago could ripple through time in ways no ledger or contract could measure. I walked the floor slowly, inspecting repairs that had been completed overnight, lifts freshly oiled, tools organized, lights bright and steady, and I felt a wave of gratitude and wonder that made my eyes sting. The garage, once a place of stress, of uncertainty, of fear of collapse, now vibrated with possibility, with energy, with the certainty that work done with integrity carries forward long after the moment passes. The community joined in small gestures, coffee delivered by neighbors, kids laughing in the back corner as they helped with simple tasks, and familiar faces returning to sit and chat, to ask questions, to offer stories from their own lives that intertwined with mine in ways I had never realized. And as I listened, watched, and smiled, I felt the quiet satisfaction of seeing justice rendered, kindness honored, and a legacy preserved. There was no grand spectacle, no dramatic flourish, just the subtle, undeniable proof that integrity and patience endure, that actions, even small ones, have weight, and that the echoes of compassion eventually return to us when we least expect them. I paused by the old workbench, running a hand over the leather-bound notebook that had survived years of neglect and storms, remembering the night the Mitchells had arrived, soaked and terrified, and feeling the full arc of time compress into a single, beautiful moment of clarity. The key they had returned, the note they had sent, the carefully documented accounts, they were more than gifts or repayment. They were affirmation, a mirror reflecting the impact of my life's choices, a validation of the courage and honesty that had sustained me through trials I had once thought insurmountable. Even Thomas, the man who had caused so much disruption and worry in the past, had been confronted with fairness, accountability, and the undeniable weight of truth. Watching him leave quietly, I felt a sense of calm, justice settle over the garage. No malice had been needed, no threats, no humiliation, only patience, documentation, and the alignment of human integrity across decades. And as I looked around, the subtle signs of recovery, the fresh paint, the organized tools, the bright sunlight, the laughter in the back corner, intertwined with memories of storms and betrayals, creating a rich tapestry that was both comforting and exhilarating. My heart swelled with pride and relief, the kind that comes only after long struggle, after watching the results of your integrity ripple outward into lives you may never fully measure. The Mitchells lingered, watching me survey the garage, and I caught their eyes, seeing the pride, the quiet joy, and the satisfaction of knowing that our shared history had not only restored me, but enriched them, giving them the foundation to succeed and the means to honor the past. I thought of Joanne, smiling from the photograph above the counter, her presence felt in every careful gesture, every act of courage and kindness, every long hour of work and patience. Her voice seemed to whisper in my mind, "We did the right thing, Henry." Always. Outside, the wind continued to whistle across the empty streets of Willow Creek, but inside, there was warmth, life, and the pulse of a community connected by history, gratitude, and hope. I poured a cup of coffee, inhaling the aroma, letting the comfort of the ritual settle my mind, and for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. The garage was alive again, not just with tools and machines, but with stories, with relationships, with memories both old and new. There was laughter and conversation, and a quiet sense that the world, despite its storms and betrayals, could align in favor of those who choose integrity and kindness. I walked to the counter, hands still wrapped around the warm cup, and felt a surge of hope for the future, knowing that while the past had shaped me, the present was mine to savor, and the legacy I had built, through courage, patience, and compassion, would endure in ways I could now fully see. And as I watched the Mitchells step outside, smiling, laughing with the townsfolk who had gathered to witness the rebirth of the garage, I realized that life's storms are not only obstacles, but opportunities, shaping us, testing us, and ultimately returning to us the rewards of patience, courage, and unselfish acts. The notebook lay open on the counter, the key beside it, sunlight glinting off the edges, a tangible link between past and present, a symbol of closure and continuation, of legacy and hope. And I knew that while this chapter had reached its culmination, the story would continue, in the laughter, the repairs, the community, and the ongoing work of a life lived with integrity, leaving the ending open yet deeply satisfying, filled with promise for tomorrow and the years ahead. The sun rose slowly over Willow Creek that morning, pale and golden, spilling across the rooftops of houses that had stood for generations, dusting the streets with light and warmth that felt almost sacred after the long, cold winter nights. I stepped outside the garage, feeling the crisp Montana air fill my lungs, and for the first time in years, I let myself breathe without the tight knot of worry pressing on my chest. The garage was bustling, not with the anxiety of impending closure, not with the tension of looming debts, but with life, with energy, with laughter, and with the steady hum of work resuming. I looked around and realized that what we had rebuilt was more than a place to fix cars. It was a sanctuary, a gathering place, a beacon for the community. People came not merely to repair engines, but to reconnect, to witness, to celebrate the resilience and integrity that had preserved this small corner of the world. I walked slowly through the space, hands brushing over workbenches polished and organized by care, over tools aligned with purpose, over the faint traces of oil and grease that reminded me of decades spent shaping this place into something meaningful. And I thought of Joanne, her laughter echoing in memory, her insistence on kindness, her unwavering belief that compassion and integrity mattered more than immediate gain. I could almost hear her voice saying, "Henry, every choice you make echoes farther than you can see." I smiled, a mixture of sadness and joy, and felt the weight of her presence settling over me like a gentle blessing. The Mitchells were there, of course, stepping in and out, helping with repairs, sharing stories with locals, and watching as the legacy of that one night in 1997 unfurled into a tapestry far beyond what any of us could have imagined. I could see Ashley explaining to a group of young students how small acts of courage and empathy had shaped her life and career. Jeremy discussing ethical practices in development and business with neighbors who had once doubted him, and Zachary guiding aspiring lawyers in understanding the impact of moral responsibility. Every word, every gesture was a reminder that the choices we make, especially the choices we make to help others, even when there is no immediate reward, can create ripples that extend far beyond our awareness, far beyond the constraints of time and circumstance. I paused by the old counter, the edge worn smooth from decades of hands resting there, the notebook and key from that night of the blizzard lying nearby, and I felt a profound sense of connection across years and lives. I remembered the fear, the cold, the uncertainty of that night, and contrasted it with this moment. Warmth, light, community, and the tangible proof that goodness endures. Even Thomas, the one who had caused so much past turmoil, had now seen the consequences of integrity prevailing, and though he would never fully embrace it, he had witnessed that fairness, patience, and moral courage are forces that cannot be ignored. I sipped a cup of coffee, savoring the quiet strength of the moment, the aroma mingling with the faint scent of oil, metal, and winter air that always reminded me of the work and care I had poured into this place. And as I looked out at the streets of Willow Creek, seeing families walking by, neighbors stopping to wave, children peering curiously into the garage, I understood fully that this was the culmination not just of decades of labor, but of choices made with courage and compassion. The acts of kindness, the willingness to risk for the sake of others, the patient maintenance of integrity even when it seemed costly, all of it had coalesced into a legacy that was visible, felt, and alive. I felt a swell of pride, not for the garage itself, not for the work I had done, but for the lives touched. The gratitude returned, the community strengthened, and the lessons passed along to a new generation who would, I hoped, continue to act with courage and empathy in the world. And in that moment, I whispered softly, almost to myself, every act of kindness matters. Every choice to help someone in need can echo far beyond what we see. The world may test us, the storms may come, but goodness endures. The Mitchells came over, Ashley smiling, Jeremy nodding, Zachary placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder, and in that simple gesture, I felt the culmination of decades of trust, patience, and moral clarity. The garage was more than a place of work. It was a symbol, a living testament to the power of action guided by heart and conscience. I thought of the note Samuel had left, the key returned, the documents meticulously assembled, and I realized that while the story of that winter night had begun with fear, chaos, and uncertainty, it had matured into a lesson that I could share with anyone who would listen. What you give freely, what you do in the service of others without expectation, will come back, sometimes decades later, in forms you cannot predict, but that will always affirm the value of courage, integrity, and compassion. I stood for a long moment, watching the sunlight glint off the garage windows, children laughing in the distance, neighbors helping one another, and I felt a completeness that was rare, precious, and deeply human. The past, with all its storms, betrayals, and uncertainties, had finally found resolution. The present, filled with warmth, recognition, and community, had been reclaimed, and the future, bright with possibilities, stretched ahead like the endless Montana sky, reminding me that the legacy of kindness and courage was not mine alone, but something to be shared, nurtured, and passed forward. And as I returned inside to the hum of machines, the chatter of neighbors, and the quiet, steady heartbeat of Willow Creek, I felt a profound peace settle over me, knowing that my life, my work, and my choices had mattered in ways that stretched far beyond me, that even the smallest acts of integrity and compassion could echo across time, inspiring others, restoring justice, and reminding us all that goodness, once sown, returns in ways both wondrous and enduring.